My journey begins in 1609. I can see Henry Hudson's ship, the Half Moon, drifting into the harbor. To the crew, this wasn't a city. It was a wilderness of chestnut trees and vast tidal marshes. They stepped onto a shore alive with trade routes that had existed for centuries before them. It was a quiet arrival, but it opened a door that would never close. By 1624, the Dutch West India Company had arrived in earnest. I look at these early years and I see a company town, not a colony. In 1626, Dutch officials purchased Manhattan from the Lenape. It's a moment often told as a simple transaction of $24 worth of beads, but the reality was far more complex. A collision of two cultures who had completely different ideas of what owning land even meant. I've reconstructed the first settlement here. Look at these homes. They aren't the brick townhouses we think of. They are rough, hand-cut timber huts. We felled the thick Manhattan forests with hand axes, dragging logs through the muck to raise the first palisades. The air back then didn't smell like exhaust. It smelled of fresh-cut wood, salt spray, and wood smoke. Life in New Amsterdam, the 1640s and 1650s. By the mid-1600s, the settlement finally had a name that felt permanent: New Amsterdam. If you walked with me down the Heere Straat, the broad street that you know today as Broadway, you'd be stepping into a chaotic, loud, and surprisingly cosmopolitan world. Even then, this island was a melting pot. Close your eyes and listen. You'd hear the guttural Dutch of merchants, the sharp French of Huguenot refugees, German and English, all mixing in the smoky air of the waterfront taverns.
Let's step inside one of these homes to escape the bustle of the streets. Life inside was modest and very cramped. Most families lived, cooked, and slept in just one or two rooms, warmed by the heat of a large hearth. There was no personal space in the way we understand it today. The entire life of the family happened in full view of one another. Light barely struggled through the windows, creating an atmosphere of eternal twilight inside, smelling of wood and the salty river air that seeped through the cracks in the walls. The entire life of the colony followed a harsh rhythm of survival. Families rose long before dawn, while the adults were busy with heavy labor, chopping firewood, mending nets, or tending to livestock. Children helped them with everything from a very young age. This was a society where every person, from the youngest to the oldest, was a small gear in a large machine designed to conquer the wild lands. Inside these walls, stories of old Europe were told, prayers were whispered, and plans were made for a future that seemed both alluring and terrifying. But look closer at the docks, where the city's ambition shows its darkest side. By 1655, the arrival of ships carrying enslaved Africans became a frequent, haunting sight. I see them on the wooden piers, exhausted people whose lives had been turned into a commodity. Their forced labor became that invisible and heavy foundation upon which these very streets and walls were built. It is a brutal, essential truth. The prosperity of the city, which we see in these old homes, was inextricably linked to the price of someone else's freedom. We cannot look at this reconstruction without acknowledging that weight.
1664. The turning point. The summer of 1664 felt different. The air was heavy, not just with the humidity of August, but with an agonizing tension. I remember standing on the ramparts of Fort Amsterdam, looking out toward the Narrows. 4 English warships, ghost-like silhouettes against the horizon, drifted into the harbor. Their gun ports were open, their cannons trained directly on our modest wooden homes and the windmill that stood as our landmark. Our Director General, Peter Stuyvesant, we called him Old Silverleg because of his ornate peg leg, was a man of absolute iron will. I can see him now, pacing the stone floors, his face flushed with rage, clutching a letter from the English demanding our surrender. He wanted to fight. He wanted to see the fort crumble before he gave up an inch of Dutch soil. But look at the faces of the townspeople in the streets. We were merchants, farmers, and tailors, not soldiers. We looked at those warships, then at our families, and we knew we didn't want a glorious massacre. We wanted to survive, to trade, and to see the next sunrise. A petition was signed. The people pleaded for peace. I watched as Stuyvesant, bitter and defeated, finally lowered his head. Without a single cannon blast, without a drop of blood in the gutters, the white flag was hoisted over the fort. I stood there as the Dutch banners, with their familiar orange and blue, were slowly lowered. In their place, the English colors rose, snapping in the sea breeze. In a single afternoon, New Amsterdam died, and New York was born. It's a haunting thing to witness how a stroke of a pen can change the identity of a city forever. 1673 to 1690, the Wall and the Watergate. Even under English rule, the city felt Dutch for a long time. In the 1670s, I'd take you to the northern edge of town. There stood a massive defensive wall of timber and earth, built to protect us from attacks that never really came. Today, that path is Wall Street. I've reconstructed the Watergate, not the scandal, but the actual gate where the wall met the East River. It was a fortified passage where carts and travelers had to pass under watchful eyes. By 1680, the population topped 4,000. New brick houses with steep, stepped gables began to replace the old wooden shacks. The Great Dock was the heart of it all. I see the harbor choked with masts. We were exporting furs, timber, and flour, and bringing in the luxuries of Europe. The city was expanding, pushing its docks further into the water, literally growing the island with landfill and ambition. The legacy of the 1600s. By 1699, as the century closed, the old Stadhuis, or City Hall, still stood as a reminder of our Dutch roots, but the transition was complete. New York had become a vital link in the English Empire. When I look at these AI-generated faces and streets, I don't see a primitive village. I see the DNA of the modern city. The diversity, the obsession with trade, the grit required to build something out of a wilderness. The 1600s was the century that decided Manhattan would be the center of the world. Thank you for walking through history with me. If you want to see a specific city or era reconstructed, let me know in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to see more of our past brought back to life.